It's time for the Your Personal Bank Show with Ferenc Toth. In an era of chaos, confusion, and craziness, Ferenc is a voice for common sense. As a financial literacy educator, speaker, and entrepreneur, Ferenc cuts through the noise to help us understand how current events affect our money, economy, and our freedom. Now, here's Ferenc Toth.
Welcome to the Your Personal Bank Show. This is Ferenc, and I want to wish you a very happy new year. Much prosperity, wealth, happiness, health, all of those good things. I wish it on you and your loved ones. So let's get into it. I've had a chance through the Christmas break to spend some time doing some research, something that I really love to do, and I love history. And the reason why I get asked this often is, and I think Mark Twain, I think he's credited with this, he probably said it best, history does not repeat itself, but it does often rhyme. And those who do not learn from history are often doomed to repeat it. See, a deep knowledge of history may be rarer today than even financial literacy, and that's bad enough. Much of the historical info that's been revised, much of the historical info has been revised over the past few decades. Unless you read a textbook written prior to World War II, it's difficult to avoid this revisionism. Therefore, most Americans have a limited or even a skewed version of history. And like I said, the Christmas break really allowed me to take a deep dive into the Revolutionary War. I've studied it a lot before, but why is this so important? Well, we have similar issues today that caused the Revolutionary War, and this will affect our society, economy, and our money today. It's surprising to me how many people don't really know the causes and why of the Revolutionary War. You see, England imposed many taxes to pay for protection. The French Indian War was expensive for England. They thought the colonists should be appreciative and help pay for the war. The problem was the colonists did not think they should be taxed if they didn't have a voice. The colonists did mostly consider themselves as British, yet they had no representation in Parliament. Now, you need to remember this point because I'm going to connect this to what is happening now. The colonists protested many of the taxes imposed on them. In fact, because of these protests, Britain brought their military to quell the protests. And in Boston, in fact, at one point, there were as many as one redcoat for every 4 citizens. Now, this led to the Boston Massacre, where the redcoats shot into a protesting crowd and 5 colonists were killed. Now, eventually, Parliament eliminated all taxes except for one, and that was tea, because of all the protests that were occurring. But that wasn't good enough. Protesters dumped today's equivalent of over $1 million of tea into the harbor, and this became known as the Boston Tea Party. Now, England responded by passing punitive measures known as the Intolerable Acts. These included shutting down Boston Harbor until restitution was made for the destroyed tea, forbidding town meetings without approval, and requiring colonists to house British troops. Now, you can imagine this was not popular at all, which this then led to the First Continental Congress, where it was resolved that a British attack on one colony was an attack on all. And this is much like NATO today. Now, lastly, British troops were then marching on Concord to confiscate weapons from the local militia when they encountered local militia in Lexington. This is where the shot heard around the world started the Revolutionary War. Now, again, why is this also important today? Well, one of the primary reasons for the colonists was taxation without representation. And this does partially explain the recent election. Today, our federal government shovels money by the billions to foreign countries. Did you vote for this? I know I didn't. Most Americans don't support it. Yet hundreds of billions of dollars are sent to foreign countries every year. Many of them are not our friends. In fact, they would hate us for free. We don't have to pay them to hate us. And how many countries tax their citizens so that they can send money to the United States? I believe the number is 0. Now, although Congress is authorized to tax us, the list of taxes today the average American pays is seemingly endless. It includes things like property tax, sales tax, state income tax, marriage license fees, local school tax, vehicle registration tax, business registration, permit fees, estate tax, waste management tax. I can go on and on and on. Of course, the biggest one being the federal income tax. Our forefathers protested over one tax on tea. Yet we have dozens and dozens of those taxes today. And you'll see what I mean in a minute, with little or no representation, just like our forefathers. Now, our borders have been open for the past 4 years. Do you support this? Most Americans don't. The last election proved that. One of the primary purposes of any government is to ensure the safety of its citizens. If a government not only does not protect its citizens, but actively encourages and assists in an invasion of illegals who are not even vetted, why do we need that government? Our government has been involved in a string of forever wars for several decades. Mitch McConnell, the Republican Senate Majority Leader, even recently stated the Ukraine war is the number one priority for the U.S. Yet the Ukraine is not even a top 10 priority for most Americans. These are examples of taxation and policies without representation. Do you feel represented by these policies? I know I don't. Neither do most Americans. And let's clear up one more thing. You do not pay taxes because you expect something in return. You pay taxes because you do not want to go to jail. Try not paying taxes. Eventually, a gun will be pointed at you, and then you will be placed behind bars. There's nothing voluntary about that. This is why Samuel Adams, one of our founding fathers, is credited stating, government, even in its best state, is a necessary evil. In its worst state, an intolerable one. This is part of the reason for the recent election results. This election gives hope for a reduced and more efficient government. I'm cautiously optimistic Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy with the Department of Government Efficiency, or DOGE, will be successful. The reason I'm cautious is if they are successful, it will likely be the first time in human history a government voluntarily reduces its size and power. Government inherently grows and gains power over time. The founding fathers were very concerned about this, and that's why they created the representative republic with its checks and balances on power. The common perception that we're a democracy is false. The founders were concerned that mob rule could take over, and nowhere in the founding documents do they describe our government as a democracy. It is a representative republic with checks and balances, three co-equal branches of government. They understood government inherently grows and gains power over time. The problem is we are currently barely still living under a representative republic. We are living mostly with a bureaucracy. We have unelected bureaucrats creating and enforcing many of our laws. The number of laws has exploded over the past few decades. Another famous Samuel Adams quote states, the more corrupt the state, the more numerous the laws. I recommend learning more about Samuel Adams. He was a remarkable patriot. He was heavily influenced by John Locke, and Thomas Jefferson described Sir Francis Bacon, Sir Isaac Newton, and John Locke as his, quote, trinity of the three greatest men the world has ever produced. That is very high praise. And if you like the beer, you probably should know a little about the person on the bottle. Unelected bureaucrats creating laws is unconstitutional. Article 1, Section 1, the very beginning of the U.S. Constitution states, all legislative powers herein granted shall be vested in a Congress of the United States, which shall consist of a Senate and House of Representatives. Congress is the only federal body that has authority to pass laws. Not unelected bureaucrats, Congress. Anything less is unconstitutional. This is how bureaucracy can be defeated. We have allowed unelected bureaucrats to wield far too much power for far too long. Now, there's a solution to all of this. And I'm going to encourage you to stay tuned in the next segment because I will be sharing that solution with you and giving you some encouragement for this new year. Also, I'm going to be sharing some projections or predictions of what to expect for 2025 and beyond and what you can do to thrive, not only survive, but thrive in this future economic environment. So stay tuned.
Stay tuned for more common sense from Ference. For more information, contact Ference at 866-268-4422 or yourpersonalbank.com. That's 866-268-4422. Welcome back to the Your Personal Bank Show with Ference Toth. Want more information? Contact Ference at 866-268-4422 or yourpersonalbank.com. That's 866-268-4422. Now back to the show with Ference Toth.
Welcome back to the Your Personal Bank Show and Happy New Year. This is Ference. If you want to reach me, you can do so at yourpersonalbank.com. And yes, you will reach me, yourpersonalbank.com. In the first segment, I was sharing some thoughts about causes of the Revolutionary War. And you think, oh my gosh, why that? Well, it's amazing how many similarities that we have today and causes that we're dealing with and going to be dealing with going forward. Again, history doesn't repeat itself, but it does often rhyme, and we can learn from it. To ignore it is to do so at our own peril, and we'd be doomed to repeat those same mistakes. So to do that would be foolish. Now, as I stated in the first segment, much of what our federal government is doing today is unconstitutional. Only Congress has the authority to pass laws, not unelected bureaucrats, Congress. And there is a solution to this. The solution is Article 6 of the Constitution that states, "The Constitution shall be the supreme law of the land, and judges in every state shall be bound thereby." Just follow the supreme law of the land. Anything else is unconstitutional. Many people ask me when listening, they assume I'm politically a conservative or maybe a libertarian. I think the more accurate description would be is I'm a constitutionalist. My position is not radical. I just want our federal, state, local governments and judges to follow the supreme law of the land, the Constitution. It's been ignored and trampled on for far too long, and the reasons are many, but primarily involve the desire to gain more power. Power typically equates to more money for those in power. This is not a Democrat or Republican problem. This is a bureaucrat or establishment or oligarch or deep state or whatever you want to call it problem. Too many of our current elected representatives and unelected bureaucrats are benefiting personally from the current situation. Regarding elected representatives, it's easy to identify who is likely to benefit financially on a personal level. Forget what they say. They're all politicians. Most will say whatever they need to get elected or reelected. Just look at their voting record. Did they vote in favor of funding to protect Ukraine's border repeatedly while ours was wide open? Did they vote in favor of closing our border? Did they vote in favor of spending more than the government receives, which helped create the highest inflation in over 40 years? These are three easy ones, and there's many others. Ronald Reagan stated, "We don't have $1 trillion debt because we haven't taxed enough. We have $1 trillion debt because we spent too much." And now it's over $36 trillion. Elected representatives who tend to vote to benefit themselves instead of their constituents tend to also appoint bureaucrats who do the same. Why wouldn't they? It helps ensure they continue to benefit. If the elected representative voted in favor of one of more of these things, more funding for Ukraine, not voting to close the border, and voting to continue spending more than the government receives, they need to be primaried and replaced. Now, they're not going to give up power easily. They've been taking advantage of the situation for a long time, and this is a job that won't be completed in one election cycle. The founders created this system to avoid rapid change, especially with the Senate. Our system's not perfect, but it is the best ever created in human history. Don't believe me? Look at the facts. More freedom and prosperity has been created for more people by the United States than any other country in human history. Fact check that one. The solution involves following Amendment 10 of the Constitution, which is part of the Bill of Rights, and it states the powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution, nor prohibited by it to the states, are reserved to the states respectively or to the people. That's a quote. What are the powers of Congress, the federal government? Well, it's stated explicitly in the Constitution. It's also known as the enumerated powers, in other words, powers that they listed. And Section 8 of the Constitution lists those powers. It states, and I quote, the Congress shall have power to lay and collect taxes, to pay debts, and provide for the common defense and general welfare of the United States. The Constitution goes on and lists some additional details regarding its powers, but the list of those powers is very short. The Constitution was written primarily to limit federal power, not to give it more power. Therefore, most of what the federal government does today is supposed to be handled by the states or the people. A great example is the Department of Education. Every state has one. Why does the federal government need one also? It doesn't. In fact, it's unconstitutional. And there's many, many examples of that. Again, the solution comes down to divesting most of the power back to the states or the people. And again, that's per the Constitution. Divesting power diffuses the concentration of power. This diffuses the ability of elected representatives and unelected bureaucrats to pursue policies or enforce rules that do not benefit citizens. If power over a policy is divided by 50 states instead of one federal representative or agency, it is much harder for a company or industry to lobby for policies that favor them. It is far more difficult for a foreign actor to bribe 50 state representatives than one federal one. This is why the deep state or the establishment, again, whatever you want to call it, is so against divesting power. They want to accumulate it. More power typically leads to more money. Now, the recent election is a reason for optimism. But as Churchill in the early days of World War II famously said, now is not the end. It is not even the beginning of the end, but it is perhaps the end of the beginning. I think his statement is appropriate here. The solution has always been education, and my greatest concern over the most recent election was, did enough people realize what really is the problem to make it a majority? And happily, a majority of Americans were awake enough and voted accordingly. Couldn't be more proud. This gives us a chance to turn the ship and avoid the iceberg, so to speak. Now, as Churchill stated, this may be the end of the beginning. We realize the problem. That's good. But now we have to do the hard work to fix it. Some of the problems we have as a country can be fixed rather quickly. The border can be closed. Illegals can be deported. We can stop funding other countries and supporting forever wars. Other problems are going to take more time. You don't pay down $36 trillion of debt overnight, even if the Trump administration does everything right financially. And Elon and Vivek with Doge reduce waste and fraud and increase efficiency. And let's assume they even start paying down some of the debt. It may be years before the debt is reduced to healthy, manageable levels. What should we expect in 2025 and beyond? I believe the longer term future has great potential to be bright, but we do have some challenges ahead of us before we get there. And I want to take the rest of this show to discuss some of those challenges and then the solutions on how to thrive in 2025 and beyond. The first and biggest challenge is the debt. How bad has that debt crisis become? Well, interest expense alone has doubled over the past 3 years. Interest on the expense is the second largest outlay for the U.S. government. And at its current pace, interest payments, because again, it keeps increasing. The government is not paying down the debt. In fact, it's still spending more than it receives. But even if it stopped, the debt would continue to increase. Or as the debt continues to increase, the interest on it also increases likewise. Therefore, at this current pace, interest payments will exceed Social Security payments in just 3 years. Folks, we hit those kind of levels, that is unsustainable. Yet the current administration, which is just about out of office, is shoveling money out the door as fast as they can. Biden announced over $2 billion to Ukraine. The next day, Janet Yellen, Treasury Secretary, announced giving another $3.4 billion in budget aid, which amounts to over $5 billion in just a couple of days. We don't have the luxury of spending all that type of money, and we will pay the price for that. And to add insult to injury, according to DOGE, the U.S. government spent $2.1 million on border security in 2024 for Paraguay, yet refused to do anything to close our own border. They spent $20 million on a new Sesame Street show in Iraq. These are the kinds of expenses we can no longer afford. Per the Joe Rogan show, Nancy Pelosi, in 2024, her stock portfolio was up 54%. In 2023, she was up 65%. To put this in perspective, Warren Buffett's best year in his career, he was up 31%. Nancy Pelosi outperformed the S&P 500 in 2024 by almost double. She made an estimated $28 million in profit. In 2023, her income was over 100 times her annual salary trading stocks. This is a case of a elected representative taking advantage of insider trading for her own benefit versus doing her job representing her constituents. I'm going to encourage you to stay tuned in the next segment. Got a few other things to share, but I'm also going to start sharing some solutions, again, on what you can do to thrive in 2025 and beyond.
Stay tuned for more common sense from Ferens. For more information, contact Ferens at 866-268-4422 or yourpersonalbank.com. That's 866-268-4422. Welcome back to the Your Personal Bank Show with Ferens Toth. Want more information? Contact Ferens at 866-268-4422 or yourpersonalbank.com. That's 866-268-4422. Now back to the show with Ferens Toth.
Welcome back to the Your Personal Bank Show. This is Ferens. You want to reach me, you can do so at yourpersonalbank.com. Yes, you will reach me, yourpersonalbank.com. First of all, I want to wish you again a happy new year, much prosperity to you and your loved ones, health, wealth, and all that good stuff. I've been sharing some thoughts about how similar many of the causes of this revolutionary war were to many of the things we're dealing with today. The biggest being taxation without representation. If you missed, some of you asked why I would do that. It's amazing how much, again, history doesn't necessarily repeat itself, but how much it rhymes and what we can learn from the past to apply to the present and avoid mistakes and learn from it. We can also then learn how to not only survive through what's we're likely going to be dealing with going forward, but thrive through it too. So if you missed it, I'm really going to encourage you to go to yourpersonalbank.com. You can listen to this or any of the previously recorded shows anytime you like. Each has its own topic. You'll find several years of shows there, or the Your Personal Bank app. Really encourage you to go there. I think you'll find it very interesting. Now, a few other thoughts, some challenges with the government making our lives more difficult. This gentleman shared, by the time I'm 67, over $600,000 will be paid into Social Security on my behalf. This is what he contributed to the system. That money would have been worth over $1.9 million if I had only received a 5% return. My annual interest would be $95,000. The government promises me about $3,000 a month at age 67, which is $36K a year. And as he states, how is this not theft? In many ways, he's correct. If he had just received a 5% return, his income in retirement would be nearly triple. We have guaranteed accounts, your personal bank accounts, paying 6% plus. Historically, have never paid less than 5.75 in the last 40 years. Insured, guaranteed, tax-free, highly liquid. So getting a 5% return would be very doable and reasonable. We have annuities today paying over 7% guaranteed first year. And we have guaranteed lifetime income rider accounts that'll give you a bonus of 30% first year and guarantee 8% increase on your income annually that you defer it. I have other accounts that'll defer your income up to 14% annually. Each year you defer it, so you can increase your income guaranteed for life, much like Social Security, and the amount increase will be 14% annually. So as this gentleman, in his point, making a 5% return would have been nearly triple of what he's actually going to get, thanks to our government. Again, as he stated, how is this not theft? And another key point with our government, and that has to do with jobs. The Philly Fed is now flagging another 650,000 fake jobs, which is on top of the over 800,000 the Department of Labor revised in 2024. This is over 1.2 million jobs that were reported by the government that never existed for 2024. At the same time, private sector jobs declined by a whopping 1.8 million over the past year. State and local full-time jobs increased about 400,000 in that same time period, yet private sector jobs dropped 1.8 million. The jobs numbers are weaker than the media or the government wants you to believe, and we're going to get into this a little bit later, but this is a big part of the reason why the Federal Reserve is dropping interest rates, or did so, even while in their inflation target numbers were still higher than they wanted them to be. And one last thing regarding government waste, fraud, all that kind of thing. California spends $837,000 to house a single homeless person, while at the same time the Amish built 12 homes in 48 hours for $25K each. What's the difference? Corruption, waste, fraud. The less the government is involved, the better. Now, some economic notes that are key that you need to understand going forward to help you determine what to expect and what the risks are. U.S. credit card defaults again jumped in the first 9 months of 2024, which is the highest since the Great Recession. Credit card defaults are now up over 50% from the previous year. And defaults of seriously delinquent credit card balances have more than doubled over the past 2 years. The bottom line is this. Lower income consumers are hit the hardest due to years of inflation and interest rate hikes. The credit card bubble is popping as we speak. Bankruptcies are at the highest level in 14 years. U.S. large company bankruptcies hit the highest point again since the Great Recessions, as companies are also struggling to pay off their debt. Leverage loan defaults are spiking. The percentage has doubled over the past 2 years. And in the United States, junk loan default rates have skyrocketed to their highest levels in 10 years, according to Moody's. And this is because companies that took on large amount of debt during the ultra low rate periods have struggled to pay it off with higher rates. Again, most company loans are adjustable. So these companies are drowning in risky debt. Another key thing to pay attention to is lending. When lenders tighten lending standards, reduce the amount they're willing to lend, that usually leads or is due to economic recession, tougher economic times. U.S. credit applications for mortgage and auto loans have currently been rejected at the highest rates in over 10 years. So the lending industry is tightening lending standards, lending money as freely as they were before because they're concerned about future economic conditions. I can tell you this from personal experience as being part of a bank board for a while. This is what banks and lenders do. They keep an eye on the economy, a close eye on the economy, and lend their money either more freely or tighten standards depending on what they anticipate the economic outlook it to be. And we get to the market. The stock market has never been so weak on this under the surface as it is currently right now. In fact, in the month of December 2024, only 17% of stocks outperformed the S&P 500. In other words, 87% of stocks dropped by more than the average of 2% in the S&P 500. This is the lowest share of stocks gaining in over 38 years. And this is something we've never seen before. Since the October 2022 bottom, the top 10 stocks have now accounted for nearly 60% of the S&P 500's gains. The next 10 stocks only contributed 11%, while the remaining 480 stocks in the S&P 500 contributed 30% of the gain. Almost all of the gain in the S&P 500 over the last 2 years has been concentrated in about 10 stocks. They now reflect 40% of the total value of the S&P 500 index. The top 3 stocks alone reflect 21% of the index market caps. A few stocks, just a handful literally, are driving the entire market. Your returns in your portfolio over the past 2 years have largely been defined by how much of those handful of stocks you owned versus not. And where in the past the S&P 500 was widely considered a great risk diversification tool because you owned a part of 500 different companies, has become much less so because of the heavy concentration in those handful of stocks. Again, 40% of the S&P 500 literally is only 10 companies, 10 stocks. This is double the percentage we saw 7 years ago and is the highest percentage we've ever seen on record, including the 2000 dot-com bubble. What this does is for those that are invested in the S&P 500, and that is a large number of folks, there is an increased concentration in just those 10 companies. One of the best ways to mitigate risk is diversification. The S&P 500 has become a far less desirable tool for a diversification standpoint because of the heavy concentration of just the top 10 companies. Again, 40% of the index is accounted for by just 10 companies. If you're concerned about this concentration and the future where things are going, and I think rightly so, one option is diversify into something insured, guaranteed, safe. This is the golden era. This is the golden era of fixed assets. High cash value, dividend paying insurance policies, annuities, guaranteed lifetime income riders have never been better in 40 plus years. What a great way to peel off some of those gains, diversify some of your risk, and lock some of those gains in guaranteed. Create a guaranteed lifetime income or guaranteed growth or reduce your taxes. Create a bucket of money that will not go down regardless of market conditions. If you want more information on that, contact me at yourpersonalbank.com. Stay tuned in the last segment. I'm going to share a little bit more about that. Again, how to thrive in 2025 and beyond.
Stay tuned for more common sense from Ference. For more information, contact Ference at 866-268-4422 or yourpersonalbank.com. That's 866-268-4422. Welcome back to the Your Personal Bank Show with Ference Toth. Want more information? Contact Ference at 866-268-4422 or yourpersonalbank.com. That's 866-268-4422. Now back to the show with Ference Toth.
Welcome back to the Your Personal Bank Show. This is Ference. You could reach me at yourpersonalbank.com. Yes, you will reach me. It's yourpersonalbank.com. Happy New Year. And I just finished the last segment off with something that rhymed. Didn't realize it until I said it. But how to thrive in 2025. I like that. We're going to discuss that here in this last segment. Last couple thoughts, and I promise I'll get there. The surges in money market fund assets, like we are seeing currently, have only occurred 3 times before. We're seeing unprecedented amount of money going into money market funds because people are getting more and more concerned about the future risk, and rightly so. 2001, prior to the dot-com crash, 2008, prior to the financial crisis, and 2020, prior to the pandemic. When cash hoarding hits these kind of levels, trouble often follows. And I've been saying this now for a while, that what worked in the past, the previous decade of low interest rate, easy monetary policy, will likely struggle in the next decade. And the stuff that didn't do so well in the past decade, like fixed assets, are going to thrive in the next decade. And I'm not the only one saying that. I've shared this many times, but analysts from Goldman Sachs, JP Morgan, BlackRock, Vanguard are all coming out with projections of the S&P 500 averaging 3 to 5% annually for the next decade. They're not just pulling this out of their hat. They have very strong reasons for sharing this. And it goes against much of their investment model. At the same time, Vanguard recently has come out projecting that bond returns will be higher than S&P 500 returns over the next decade. Vanguard themselves are stating you probably likely will make more money in bonds or bond-related assets, fixed assets, that is, cash value insurance, dividend-paying policies, annuities, guaranteed income riders, than you'll make in a return with the S&P 500. Wouldn't that be ironic? But that's a significant change. My point I've been making is getting to understand the bond market and how that operates going to become very much more valuable than in the past, where most people had much more familiarity with the stock market or real estate or cryptocurrencies. You see, when it comes to the bond market, there's what they call trigger levels. In other words, it's bond return levels. Bonds pay interest to the investor, much like a CD does. Institutional investors tend to buy treasury bonds and corporate bonds, and they're doing so, in most cases, to obtain interest. A good rule of thumb is when the 10-year treasury hits 5%, many of these large institutional investors will pull their money out of the stock market and invest in the bond market instead, treasury bonds. Why? Well, a pension fund, for example, their primary focus is not appreciation. They're not looking to maximize the growth on the portfolio. They want income with a high probability of receiving that income consistently. They can get a 5% return with a high degree of certainty. They're not going to take the risk in the market, the stock market, for appreciation. It's not worth it. It's not their primary focus. Recently, the 10-year treasury has been floating around 4.5%, or close to that 5% mark. The closer you see get to it, the more and more you'll see many of these large institutional investors like insurance companies, pension funds, etc., focus more and more on the bond markets. Now, one of the common misconceptions with bonds is you'll see negative articles about bonds. And the key thing is you need to understand why they're stating it's negative. I'm going to use an example of this Market Watch article. It states, it's been another disappointing year for bonds. Why now isn't the time to throw in the towel? Here's the point they're making. They're talking about bond traders. Bond traders are people who buy bonds and sell them much like stocks with the idea they're trying to get a return, obviously. Bond yields are typically the opposite of bond values. A bond trader is looking for the value of the bond to increase. They want to buy it at a lower value, and it increases in value, and then they sell it, much like a stock. But most people don't buy bonds for that purpose. Again, institutional pension funds, insurance companies, and most even individual investors are, if they're interested in bonds, they want an income off of it. They want the interest, a yield, as they call it. Well, when yields go up, the value of the bond goes down, but the return on it goes up. So if you're buying it for a return, which again, most institutional investors, that's what they're doing, not bond traders, institutional investors, banks, insurance companies, pension funds, they like the higher yields, the higher interest. That's what they want. That's what they're going for. So that's where a lot of the common confusion comes in. You see these, like this Market Watch article, that's the title is negative towards bonds, but then as you read it, you find out no, it's negative for bond traders, but very positive for bond investors. And that's the side you want to be on. Again, think of a bond as a CD. That's the best analogy I can give you. And you can buy treasury bonds, for example, in all time periods, much like you can buy CDs with different time periods. And they're backed by the faith of the government. They're considered a very safe investment. And that's why, like this other article discusses, bond yields surged to decade high after the Fed rate cut. Well, again, the surging bond yield is the key. What's the interest rate it's paying? It's like a CD, it's giving you a higher interest rate. So if you're buying it for the interest, that's great news. Now, why this is of such concern, and this is something you should be aware of, and those concerned about real estate need to understand this. The Federal Reserve recently, last few months, has dropped interest rates by a full percentage point, yet bond rates have gone up by approximately a full percentage point. If we focus on, say, the 10-year Treasury, for example. Now, a lot of real estate investors thought, hey, the Fed's dropping rates, so that means interest rates will go down. Yet they didn't. In fact, they went back up. Why? Mortgage rates are not based on the Federal Reserve. They're based on the 10-year Treasury. And they're usually about 2 to 3% higher than the 10-year Treasury, which is currently at about 4.5%. Your typical 30-year fixed mortgage right now is about 6.5 to 7%, about 2.5% higher. If you're a real estate investor or you're looking to purchase a property or concerned about mortgage rates, you want to pay far more attention to the 10-year Treasury rate than the Federal Reserve rate. I guess the key point we want to take from all of this is, what is the bond market trying to tell us? With higher yields, higher interest rates that the bonds are paying, the expectation the bond market has is that we will have higher inflation for decades, higher for longer. We've been hearing that from the Fed. Don't expect mortgage interest rates to go down significantly anytime in the future. The era of easy monetary policy and really low interest rates is likely over for years, if not longer, likely even decades. Vanguard themselves has come out and stated that they expect bond interest rates to be higher than the S&P 500 returns for the next decade. Now, the average investor can't invest in a bond auction. You have to have typically hundreds of millions of dollars to do that. But you can take advantage of the higher bond interest rates or higher yields by investing with outfits that invest in bonds like insurance companies, annuities. This is why the returns on those is higher than it's been in over 40 years. We're seeing higher bond interest rates than we've seen in 40 plus years. And the primary driver behind the higher bond interest rates is the government debt, the high levels of debt, which will unlikely be paid down at all or back to manageable levels, certainly for years, maybe even decades. This is the new reality. First step is to understand what's going on. Then you can take actions to make better financial decisions. This is why the experts are calling this the golden era of fixed assets. Now, CDs will fluctuate more than bonds because the Federal Reserve moves rates up and down more than the bond market typically. Insurance companies lock in rates a year at a time, so they only move annually versus monthly like the Fed. So these higher rates that we're seeing, you can lock in for far longer periods of time with high cash value dividend policies or annuities or guaranteed income riders. As I stated earlier in the show, this is the best time in over 40 years. We've got companies paying over 6% insured, guaranteed, tax-free, highly liquid. We have annuities that are paying over 7%, guaranteed the first year. If you have an annuity over 2 years old, you should seriously look at rolling that over, doing a 1035 exchange to a newer product. They'll pay the bonus, offset any penalty you may have, and give you better returns going forward. Or if you would like a pension, or like to increase the guaranteed income that you receive, there's never been a better time to do that. I have companies that will pay you a 30% signing bonus up front, increase your guaranteed lifetime income by 30%, and then they'll guarantee a roll-up or an increase of 8% annually. So if you just wait 1 year, the amount of money you would receive on a guaranteed income basis would be 40% higher. You could take assets off the table, for example, that maybe have grown tremendously over the past couple of years, but unlikely to do so much in the future and certainly at risk to going down. Why not take some of that off the table and guarantee an income starting a year from now 40% higher than it would be today? Or if you want to wait longer, you've got companies that will increase your income by as much as 14% a year, guaranteed. You could double your guaranteed lifetime income in a matter of just 5 years or so. It's an incredible time for fixed assets. If you haven't looked into it recently, I strongly encourage you to do so. Contact me at yourpersonalbank.com for more information. Again, Happy New Year. I wish you much wealth, health, happiness for this new year. It's exciting. We have tools that'll not only allow you to survive, but absolutely thrive in 2025. Stay tuned next week to the Your Personal Bank Show. And as always, as long as it's on our money, in God we trust.
Listen Tuesdays at noon and Saturdays at 1 to the Your Personal Bank Show for more information. Contact Ference at 866-268-4422 or yourpersonalbank.com. That's 866-268-4422. This show is designed to provide accurate and authoritative information. The presenter and guests of this program do not engage in legal, accounting, or tax advice. Professional advice regarding your situation should be sought if required. Some products discussed may have limitations and not be available in all states. Excessive unpaid loans may affect performance. Distributions may become taxable if not managed properly. Replacements may not be suitable for everyone. There may be charges when replacing coverage. Dividend rates and bank line of credit rates may change. For current rates, contact Ference at 866-268-4422 or yourpersonalbank.com. Again, that's 866-268-4422 or yourpersonalbank.com.